the greater one's exposure to possible miscarriages of justice, the greater one's sensitivity, and perhaps, when the opportunity arises, readiness to try and mould something which would solve it. But I would describe myself as a proceduralist rather than as a technical lawyer. It was the procedures of the law that seemed to me to need careful evaluation, and mediation is one such. It's a new procedure. Other procedures, I can't put my finger on one right. Well, in the Supreme Court, we were the pioneers in referring matters out to referees for report. When I was appointed, there was a huge backlog of work in the construction industry, because good barristers don't like construction building cases. They dread them, hold masses of detail about it, matters of questionable relevance, and the building work had just piled up and wasn't being serviced. And so the way to service it was to have a new part in the Supreme Court rules giving judges power to refer issues out to referees for decision. Now, there always had been a power of that sort under the Arbitration Act for matters of accounting or technical knowledge, but this was a more general power in Part 72 of the rules. So I regard that as a significant advance to free up the procedures of the law. But the huge advance in procedures in my time was the coming of age of declaratory relief, where you go to the court for a declaration. And that was not used at all when I was first appointed as an equity judge. And it was given to the equity court by an act of 1965, just the same year I was appointed to the bench. And it was given to the equity jurisdiction. And I was able to, as an equity judge, because we were in jurisdictional sort of compartments, making declarations of right in relation to contracts and all sorts of areas. And that opened up the procedures of the law to fill a necessary void. But declaratory relief it was a new boy on the block. It used to be said, look, you've got jurisdiction to make orders, and people have to obey them, but you can't just hold forth as to what, making declarations of right. And that was the conservative view.
I'd be interested to know, actually, looking back, are there further areas that you would have liked to have brought that procedural streamlining approach that you've just been describing? Are there still areas that you think are very much in need of it?
No, I'm not sure. I think those two are significant, declaratory relief. And there's still a judge, I think he recently retired, Peter Young, who wrote a little book on declaratory relief, building on what I developed. But that, I regard that as a very significant contribution to the functioning of the courts. And the other significant contribution was the rule, inserting the rule 72, Part 72, about being able to refer matters out to referees for decision. The Conservative judges were very up against that. They said, look, if there's not enough judges to do the work, we've got to get more judges appointed. Or, this silly sort of approach. But declaratory relief and Part 72 are the two big procedural achievements of my time on the bench.
There's another achievement I'd like to talk about briefly too during your time as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and this is to do with the Australian Government International Legal Services Advisory Council, which you were very much involved in. I believe you were appointed to create this or head this up by the then Prime Minister Bob Hawke.
Yes, yeah. That I saw the need for Australia to be able to make a positive input into the legal relations between our various countries. I saw a common approach to legality as being a bonding between Australia or between countries. If we can share our approach to the law, then it's much harder to think we're going to have issues which can degenerate into open conflict. And I just felt as a matter of spreading peace and harmony that there's a lot to be said for having an ambassador, if you like, for judicial peace and harmony in the region. And that was the purpose of ILSAC, the Advisory Council.
You were lucky too that there was a receptive climate at that time. I believe the then New South Wales Tourism Minister John Brown was important in helping you to realise this aim.
Yes, he was. He was. And also on the bench there were judges who were supportive of a broader involvement. Michael Kirby was a great ambassador for greater judicial involvement, an awareness of the availability of judicial power to mould society, to make it fit better into I suppose a social pattern within a region is important, I think, if we're going to be able to live together as nations.
It sounds as though the activities of that body are more necessary than ever. There is so much conflict in the world. When you were involved in that body, did you find yourself thinking, but some of these systems are so different? The inquisitorial system that is widely used in Europe is very different to the adversarial system that we practice here in Australia and in England. And then there are other cultures still where there's totally different approaches. Did you find yourself thinking it's not that easy to find common ground between the different cultures?
Well, not so much in the cultures that have a Western inheritance, the common law inheritance, but cultures that don't have that common inheritance, such as some of the Asian nations, yes. It's not the great bastion of strength in the legal system, and that's what brings us together really, is integrity. Where there is a lack of integrity in the judicial system or in the governmental system, where people are all making their own little pile on the way through, it's very hard then to have a comity which is consistent with the administration of justice even-handedly. And it really it's the integrity. And to a large extent, I think the colonial powers are answerable to a degree for having encouraged the lack of integrity. You could influence government decisions. I don't mean at home, but I mean in the Asian nations where, and it's invidious to say Asian nations, but I'll just leave it as the lack of integrity in the public sector is inimical to justice and to law and to freedom.
If you'd had your time again, would you like to have specialised more in comparative law? That's a very interesting area, and that touches on what you're talking about.
No. Comparative law, there's a lot of word spinning goes on in comparative law, but once you've compared A to B and agreed well, the differences are C, well then where do you go from there? I preferred more the empirical approach of case-by-case similarity and assimilation, I'll use that word, rather than a philosophy of comparative. See, people come up with comparative mediation. Now, mediation, I think there were 13 different descriptions for it last time I did. I lecture on it sometimes. It's all a lot of bunkum. Mediation is simply about two different points of view. Both of them, and I say this when I'm mediating, look, I know you have very different views, and I respect the intellectual integrity with which you hold these differing views, but we've got to find a resolution here which is not going to be an affront to either of you, but which you can run with.